And weirdly, I believed his story that I was the reason. I didn't communicate properly. I didn't ask properly. And you hear that a lot.
In light of the holidays, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to go back and revisit 3 of the most popular podcast episodes. And I want to also talk about why I think they hit so powerfully. So first of all, I hope that you're having a wonderful long weekend and that you're staying very safe as we kick off the summer. But we're going to start this week's episode revisiting a podcast where Lisa and I talk about the passive-aggressive games that narcissists often play and why it makes us feel like there's something wrong, that we're the problem. And I know so many of you come to me and ask, am I the narcissist? So in this episode titled, How Mad Can I Make You? Lisa and I talk about how to know that you're not the problem, what critical questions you should be asking yourself to help you know where the pathology or the toxic dynamic is originating from. So how did you recognize that you were being manipulated? Because it was really hard for me to see it in the beginning because it looks so passive. It looks so innocent. I just don't know. Well, maybe they really don't know, But when you hear it the 50th time on the same issue, it's a simple issue that anybody can go figure out. Then you're like, oh, maybe this is deliberate. So how did you recognize that this was a game the person was playing with you?
I was already out when I realized it. So many things. And I think that's somewhat of a unique position that we had already split up by the time I really realized how purposeful all of this was. When I was in it, again, I didn't have the language, but I had never thought he is manipulating me. Never, not once in the entire relationship. I could not understand why he didn't get such basic things that made sense to him at work and in other areas of his life. And he didn't act that way with anyone else except me. And weirdly, I believed his story that I was the reason. I didn't communicate properly. I didn't ask properly. And you hear that a lot. I mean, I think in my mind, I'm using these examples of weaponized incompetence and sort of pretending like I didn't see the garbage. I didn't know it needed to be taken out. You know what made me know the garbage needed to be taken out? Checking. We had a lid. You open the lid and you look. If you're adults, that would make me see.
That was, you start to smell it. I mean, there's another one too. It gets too long. You know it. You can't.
There's a list of ways that people know things. And that it's so basic, but it used to make me frustrated. And I have an insanely sarcastic streak. So I would say really like angry, resentful, sarcastic things, which certainly didn't help the situation, obviously, but it would infuriate me that I had to have these arguments, but I never saw it as manipulation. So when I saw it, I was out and we were still communicating in that 9 or 10 months after the relationship. After we split, we were still, situationship, whatever you want to call it. And it was in that time that I started to be like, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. He has to know. How could something be so obvious to him in one area of his life and the literal same example, but just in our house suddenly becomes different? I started to realize, could this be on purpose? And once I realized it was, I could never see it any other way. And that's why one of the biggest things people hear me say is they already know. We waste so much time trying to convince them, you don't see that this is passive aggressive. You don't see that this is weaponized incompetence. You don't see, they see.
Yeah, this is how I knew. Mine started using a really ridiculous example. He knew I was sleeping a lot and he had access to his Google account, which meant that I could see what images he's even downloading if you could go look at the browser history. And I saw he was downloading these little images of I miss you, I love you that he's not sending to me. He's obviously downloading them to text to somebody else. So I mentioned it to him, which dumb me. I should just have used it as I need to leave this relationship. It's really, really over. But I actually said something to him and he goes, I don't know, Carrie. You know way more about technology than I do. It was such a ridiculous statement. I just remember looking at it and like, oh, okay. And then moving on, you know what, I'm not engaging in this. This is going to go nowhere. But there's something, and I would love to use this as a self-help tip today. There was something you said that I thought was super powerful, and it was the way it made you feel. And I think that's a really powerful indicator that other people can use as an identifier that this is passive aggressive. So let's get into what does passive aggressive behavior make the victim feel like? And I heard for you, it made you feel crazy,
resentful, confused, full of rage. It incites rage in me to this day. when I deal with people who are passive aggressive, I cannot stand it. It is such a, like, I get heated even thinking about people being passive aggressive. I value honest and open communication. And I am that kind of communicator. I always have been. And I think when I look back, I realized that I started to become, I don't think passive aggressive, although certainly I can dish that if I choose to, but I know that I'm doing it. And it's always in response to that. But if you find yourself feeling crazy, angry, resentful, or you start to become passive aggressive, maybe, I mean, we could call it mirroring, but also you're just picking up these traits. You're sort of like, oh yeah, you are passive aggressive, then I'm gonna be passive aggressive too. If you feel that, that's a huge indicator that something is wrong in the relationship. There's a communication breakdown. And I'm all for, to a degree, trying to call out the behavior. I think we all need to go through that process and say, you're being passive aggressive and this is what it is. And see what their reaction is. If they're like, no, I'm not, and just immediate denial, that's a problem. If they're like, what is that? Let me consider it. At least it's a better sign. But you're not going to see that in a narcissistic relationship. You'll see deflection and denial.
Exactly. I know for me, my reaction was one of, I felt just like I couldn't make a move, that everything was wrong, that everything I did, said was wrong, and that I started to feel paralyzed. I often would just shut down, and I find myself having an extreme rage reaction as well, but not rage at anybody, but just rage that felt so helpless. I felt really helpless. And this is a powerful thing. I think people haven't learned to use how they feel as an indication of what's happening to them. But it's a really powerful indicator because feelings are really actually just like a warning device on your dashboard of your car. It tells you something's going wrong. So when you feel sad, then it means something's upsetting you. If you're feeling angry, then that means you're feeling a loss of control. You're feeling hurt or attacked. I mean, if you're feeling anxious, you feel like you're probably feeling out of control, like something bad might happen. So feelings indicate something. So I think that when we start to feel a consistent way, it's really wise for us to say what's happening, which is tough because then it tells you that something's going wrong. So that then you can say, what do I want to do about this? What are my choices? And what I found is that, like that example of him saying, well, you know better, Carrie, you know more about technology. I just thought, you know what? I'm just not stepping into this. This is just not worth it. So the indication of frustration, me being frustrated with stupid responses, that I just thought, okay, I'm not biting. I'm not getting into this with this person.
But choosing not to get into it is also you sort of shutting down, or might have been perceived as acceptance. And I know that it isn't, but that's how they would see it, certainly. I mean, really, you're talking about trusting instincts. And I know how hard that is. And so do you when you're actually in the relationship, because you don't trust your own instincts. You think, maybe it is the way that I'm communicating. Maybe I did start this argument. Maybe it was me. Maybe I am the problem, because they're so good at convincing you of that. They're so good at that game of flipping it onto you.
Which is why I think the fact that you went out and talked to other people, I don't know if you said that in this podcast episode or the other one, but you getting feedback is really a wise thing because you're validating, is this upsetting? What would you do if this happened to you? And when you got that puzzled look like, I don't know, why is that happening that way? Then you knew you weren't the variable. You knew that this dynamic was the issue, not yourself.
So I think actually helped me in a huge way, more than I think I even realized, that it helped me maintain somewhat of a sense of self. Like there was always, you hear victims say all the time that, I thought I was the narcissist. I never thought that. I didn't know anything about narcissism the entire time I was in the relationship. So I wasn't using that language, but I was never committed to the idea that I was the problem. I definitely wondered if I was contributing. I couldn't understand how I could be so wrong, because I felt right in so many arguments that we had, and not in a I win the argument kind of way, but just I was like, it can't be me. It can't be. Too many people around me agreed, but most of the time you don't see that. Victims are not asking people around them, but it is very validating to realize that 8 to 10 people who I trust, some of whom would absolutely say to me, actually, yeah, you were definitely wrong. I'm not talking about some girl group who just blindly follows me, but true friends who would say, no, you started it that time, or they were like, no, this is him, 100%.
In this next clip, which is from episode 57 with Rosanna Fay, we get into why we feel like we're the abusive one, why we sometimes wonder we're the narcissist, and how we can pick up what some people call psychological or narcissistic fleas because we begin to use their same tactics against them, hoping that somehow this is going to change the dynamic. But it only ends up making us feel worse in the process.
Near the end of that relationship, I was feeling so crazy, so confused, and really hurt, actually. And there was a moment I remember where my ex actually accused me. He was my husband at that time, but he accused me of being the problem. And I'll never forget it because we were in a car driving and I'd just been hoovered back into the relationship again. And I had known that during this brief month period that we were apart, that he had been seeing other women, and particularly he had a girlfriend and he flew her into town, and they even looked at houses. They shopped houses that weekend. And I remember looking at him and was horrified that he would do that while we're just in a break. We weren't even divorced. We were just taking a break. And he was still feeling, he was popping by to have breakfast with me. I think more to check up on me during that period. But he was still like trying to stay in touch with me. But yet he would do all of this. And I remember confronting him about how horrible that was, how hurtful that was. And he looked at me and he said, Gary, you're going to have to decide whether or not you can live with a sex addict. Essentially making the problem me. That my inability to accept him and accept the situation that was causing all of the issues. Now, that's not as dramatic as I know I hear all the time from people who get a hold of me, from clients, from guests, from commenters on social media that share about how the fact that they actually have a partner that even takes it further, that accuses them of being the problem. The whole reason the relationship's going wrong is because of their difficulties, their wanting too much, them being too sensitive, or they're having maybe some kind of mental health issues or interpersonal issues. But essentially the toxic person flips the script and makes the victim, the survivor, the problem. And it is utterly crazy making because it becomes really tricky to know who is the problem. Because I don't know if you did, but I started to react to the abuse. Was that something you started to do as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, reacting is kind of a survival technique, right? We have to, in order to survive, it's like, we just want to stop what's going on, and to protect ourselves to survive, we just do something out of character, out of our own integrity, out of our normal behavior, and do something that we just normally wouldn't do to stop the abuse or stop the attack. So just thinking about what you said, oh, you're going to have to deal with this sex addict. You're going to have to make the decision. He puts it on you. And that's what one of the things they do is they put it on us so that they don't have to take that accountability and responsibility for their own actions. One of the things my ex would do is he would say, well, you married an alcoholic, that I have a problem. That I'm an alcoholic and I do this. And so you knew this walking into this relationship. You knew this before you married me. So now I'm the problem because I knew this and I chose to marry him. I chose to be in these situations. So when he would rage at me or yell at me or take my mood from calm and cool and collected on the couch and then start a fight with me because maybe, looking back in hindsight, I think he was probably upset about something or something happened to him at work and he didn't really know how to hold that emotion or try to even just identify it as anger or frustration or whatnot. So he placed it onto me. And when I got angry and frustrated, he was, oh, I don't have to feel my own emotion. So now Ro gets to feel it. And so now I'm the one that's getting mad and angry because he's picked and poked and prodded on me when I'm just like laying on the couch. He's asking me if I'm in a bad mood. And then out of a reaction, so this is the reactive abuse, I come back and I do things out of character, like I yell back, I rage back, and I start to mirror him and how he's behaved in the past. And then I ask, like, am I an angry person? Is that me? That's where I get to that point where I felt like I was the problem because I don't normally act out like this, but I'm starting to like mirror some of his behaviors. And that's where I would ask, am I the problem?
Do you know why you mirrored them? Because I know why I did. I'd love to hear what got you to. You said partly was, did it just, you get to the end of yourself and you just get frustrated and react? Or was there other reasons why you married him?
There was more. So I'm thinking about this. So let's see how I can articulate this because I'd love to hear what you think. But I think looking back, and I did not know this then in the marriage, but I think looking back, I was really observant of how he behaved and what worked for him. And it seemed to me that if he raged and got what he wanted, he did get what he wanted. That was his supply. It was letting out that anger and then blaming it on either alcohol or me somehow, that I was the one that changed his mood or I'm putting him in a bad mood. I frustrate him. But it worked for him to rage out. And I would notice that and observe that and go, okay, well, if that works for him and he has this episode of acting out, then I do it and maybe I'll feel better because he seems to feel better. after he does it. So I try it, but the difference is he feels better when he does it. Me, I feel worse because it's not in alignment with who I am. Like, I don't just get angry like that. I don't rage out. I don't, there's one time I threw a plate at him. That's not something I do, but when you poke a bear and you or pull a dog's tail, they're going to turn around and try to bite you back. And it's not something they would normally do, but that's something I did. And I think it's because I watched him do it in the past. And I thought, well, that works for him. He seems to be calm after he does this episode. So let me try an episode to stop him from yelling at me and screaming at me. He gets calm and I'm agitated. So that's the difference. It really didn't work for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never saw it as a successful effort to deal with difficult emotions. That never was something that crossed my mind. But I thought that somehow if I modeled the negative behavior, almost like a parent, if I treat you poorly in the way that you're treating me poorly, maybe I can increase your cognitive empathy. Maybe I can make you more aware of how crappy that feels. And so you're like, oh, you'll get a clue. Oh, that's bad. I shouldn't be doing that. I need to stop doing that. So mine was sort of like to teach him a lesson.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't work because I think what all it did was it degraded the situation, and maybe even degraded the conversation. So if he was crappy to me and I was crappy back to him, he just got crappier to me. So it didn't really do what I wanted it to do. But
it just increased the crappiness to each other.
We're going to wrap up today's special with a clip from episode 38, where I interviewed Tara Ball about covert narcissism. And we discuss why it's so tough to recognize this group, how they don't present like the grandiose or entitled narcissist, but they use their position as a martyr or a victim and enlist your empathy and sympathy, which makes it extremely difficult to spot.
My experience with my ex was actually a covert narcissist. And I think for me, as someone who had some knowledge of narcissism, not a lot, but some knowledge, I found it the most difficult to label him as such because it is not as obvious as a malignant narcissist. Absolutely not. It's just that grandiosity is very private. My ex, for example, would say a lot that he imagined he'd be walking down the street and get discovered and, be in movies and TV because he was discovered. But that was private. That was only shared with me. And so that sense that the grandiosity, all of the other traits of a narcissist he absolutely have, but it was so much more quiet. And it was only shared in the relationship with me. And because it was only shared with the relationship with me, I didn't connect that dot. That connecting it to the fact that it was actually narcissism and these were narcissistic traits. I was only connecting it as his sort of private or secret dreams. It was sort of easy to sort of excuse or minimize. Like, oh, we all have dreams like that, right? But honestly, I've never had that dream. I've never wanted to be famous or be a celebrity. That's never been a dream of mine. And I've never really thought a lot about feeling superior to other people. And that's not a dream or a goal of mine.
it's funny because I have to say I'm probably a little higher on the narcissistic scale than you are because I have thought about some of that. But yeah, I didn't, in the middle of that friendship, and this was a friendship, and I have since then met a few men that I maybe was getting to know, thinking about dating, that I now would say was covert, but it was a friendship that this happened in, and in the middle of that relationship, I never once thought to myself, this person's narcissistic. It never even crossed my mind. Because like you said, that wasn't what this individual led with. This person led with something that was really amazing and thoughtful and seemed sensitive. This is a person who serves and seemingly shows up for other people and has been in a helping career most of this individual's life. So it never crossed my mind. And I think that's what tricks a lot of people in about covert narcissism is that it's very difficult to spot. It doesn't present as the grandiose braggart who's the life of the party. They're not people who necessarily is name dropping and everywhere. They can be super subtle. So that let's start with defining it, because I think that's essentially to understand what it is. Covert narcissism has all the same traits as other types of narcissists, but it presents almost as an inverse to the grandiose narcissist in the sense that instead of looking for the limelight of how great I am and how special, their specialness is usually in their martyrdom, in showing up and serving people and the degree that they sacrifice for other people. or in the victim role. So they're either the biggest victim or they're the biggest martyr. And those two actually are quite different, because the martyr isn't the victim. They're just the people who are always doing, you could even say they're the perfect people pleaser. They're doing everything for everybody. And then they think they should be appreciated. They think they're special and have the ability to really show up, and they don't know why people then don't see it and appreciate it. And you're more likely to hear all of that, the negativity about the attention they deserve to get and they often don't get, or they deserve to get. And then they do get it. Here's an example of how it happened in this relationship. This friend was really showing up in an amazing way during my late husband's battle with cancer, during all of his hospital stays and his treatments and stuff. And she'd been talking to other people about it, particularly at a religious organization that we were both associated with. And they decided they wanted to do a spotlight on the situation. And you would think they would spotlight my late husband's battle, his cancer struggle, as well as maybe what it was like for me and the family. What they spotlighted was the way she was the perfect friend for me. So here they did this thing that they then presented at church about how great her service was. At the time, it felt so jarring because my life had been consumed with the care of my late husband, and she had really no insight into what it was like on a day-to-day basis for me, what my family was suffering and the loss we were about ready to experience. And she's getting all the glory for this, while I'm about ready to go through one of the most devastating experiences of my life. And if anybody who'd been like laying themselves out, it certainly was me and my family. Yeah, she was there sometimes, but she couldn't be there all the time. She wasn't there for the really horrible, hard things that I was keeping kind of private, because those are things that you just don't let other people in. It's too personal. And it's my husband's battle. It's his experience. Nobody deserves to be in that space other than me and him. So to me, that was a great example, is that was her supply. You want to think of it that way. Her supply was the attention she was getting. In fact, when I was thinking of leaving the area after I was widowed, she said, "After all I'd done for you," is one of the things she loved to repeat. "I can't believe you do this to me after all the things I've done for you." I'm thinking, what do you mean? I never asked you to do any of that. I thought that was a gift to me, not an obligation. So you'll notice that. You'll notice that things are transactional, just like they're transactional with the more grandiose or more overt narcissist. It's just the biggest victim or the biggest martyr, but they have all the other things. They're very envious, they're very controlling. But the other big difference between them is the other types of narcissists tend to be overtly aggressive. This group tends to be really passive aggressive. Like even that statement, "After all I've done for you." So they'll tend to get you on the backside, like withhold things or threaten to pull the relationship back if you don't quite show up right. But they critique you, they're defensive, all the things that you typically expect to see, you see. But what really made it hard for me to spot this individual was, and this is the thing I hear a lot, is that they seem highly empathic. And in fact, I think sometimes people, and I don't mean to step on anyone's toes, but when people start to brag that they're a super empath, I get a little edgy, because everybody is special in their own right. There's nobody who has superpowers. So when I start to hear somebody elevate themselves like that, I get a little uncomfortable. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. But this group, I think the covert narcissist would say they're highly empathic. She would say, she's super sensitive. She showed up for me. She sacrificed for me. So you can see all of that and you think, oh, this is a person who is reciprocal in their compassion. Oh, no. It's not. It looks like it, but it's not. And there's one of the other ways we get super tripped up on this.
Thank you so much for joining me on this special episode of revisiting some of the best podcasts with the interesting discussions. I hope you found it enlightening as we focused on why it's so troubling and difficult to spot toxic relationships. And I'd really love to hear from you. What tricked you? What blinded you to the fact that you were in a pathological love relationship? And I sure hope you'll join me next week when I interview Catherine Fabrizio about her new book, The Good Daughter Syndrome, when we really hone in on the toxic dynamics between mothers and daughters.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Carrie McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club, at carriemcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.